On the 1st of May 1982, the Ministry of Defence issued the following statement. Vulcan aircraft refueled by Victor tankers attacked Port Stanley airfield during the night. Subsequently at dawn, Sea Harriers carried out further attacks. Both operations were successful. Ascension Island in the South Atlantic was the mounting base for the raid. The Vulcan would have to make a round trip of 8,000 miles without landing. Not surprisingly, the exploits of the Vulcan overshadowed its Victor support. Even the words of the MOD understated the real effort mustered by the Victor force.
I was a Victor captain. I was a flight refueling specialist, I suppose you could call it, an instructor. The Vulcan was needing to take on fuel going down to the South Atlantic, and the Vulcan crews weren't trained, so we went to Waddington, trained them. They weren't quite ready to go, so the AOC at the time said, you're a member of a Vulcan crew now, so we went down to Ascension.
In fact, there were 2 Vulcans involved, but one was a reserve. The Victor effort was on quite a different scale. As the 2 Vulcans climbed away from Wide Awake Airfield on Ascension Island around midnight, 55 and 57 squadrons had already launched, at 1-minute intervals, no fewer than 11 Victor tankers, including 1 spare. The aircraft were divided into red and blue sections. It immediately became clear that not only the spare Vulcan, but also the spare Victor would be needed.
I was very privileged to be chosen as the primary crew to do Black Buck 1. And we did the briefing, and we had a backup crew, a backup Vulcan crew with us. And we got airborne and in the stealth of night. But unfortunately, we encountered a major unserviceability with the aeroplane, like one of the windows wouldn't seat itself properly and we couldn't pressurize. Obviously, there was no point in carrying on because we couldn't go to high level, and especially at night. And we had to turn around. We tried all ways of sealing this window, including stuffing flying jackets into the gap in the window, and nothing was ever going to work, and it became patently obvious that we were going to have to turn around and go home. And the orders were that everything was to be done in radio silence, of course, and there was just this little voice from our aeroplane to the other Vulcan saying, we're unserviceable and you're going on. From what I hear, there was a stunned silence on that aeroplane, and they thought, oh my goodness me, and they went off and did the job. So we turned around, we burnt off all our fuel, and we landed, and we went off again 2 days later and did the same mission ourselves, having learnt the lessons that the crew did on the first mission.
I was actually on the reserve Vulcan on the first night, but the primary Vulcan fell down with pressurization troubles, and it was us, Martin with us, and 5 other members of his crew went down. I did most of the refueling. I certainly did nearly all of the night formation, which is a bit of an art to be used to it.
Also, one of the Victors could not reel out its refueling hose. Both of these aircraft returned to Wide Awake Airfield, and their places were taken by the reserves. The combined force pressed on, destination Port Stanley. "700 miles south of Ascension, the first Vulcan fuel transfer took place, and its tanks were topped up. The group pressed on to the second fuel transfer. The Vulcan took on more fuel from Red Section, and a Red Section Victor had its tanks topped up. Three of the Blue Section Victors had their tanks topped up by the other 3, but all of the aircraft were burning more fuel than planned, mainly because of the non-optimum altitude the combined formation was having to fly. So the returning empty aircraft had to bite deep into their fuel reserves in order to send 5 aircraft on with full tanks, mindful all the time that no aircraft should be left with insufficient fuel to return to Ascension should an in-flight emergency develop. The further south the formation flew, the more often they had to transfer fuel. although the quantities passed were smaller as each victor departed with just sufficient fuel to return home. There were more problems in store too.
Tanking inherently is a dangerous sport, but however, skill will overcome most of the major problems that we have. Now, down in the South Atlantic, there's a whole new ball game of tanking down there because the Met conditions, as you've probably already heard, that down in the Falklands you can have 4 seasons in a day down there, summer, winter, spring and autumn. And of course it's like that flying as well. Now, there are a lot of thunderstorm activity down there, and there were occasions when 1 or 2 probes have got broken. But that sort of thing is built into the game plan anyway. And aeroplanes go unserviceable and they'll have to peel off. And but because an aeroplane has got its probe broken, doesn't mean to say it can't give away fuel from the hose at the rear end. So another aeroplane can take on its load of fuel, and it's just a case of swapping positions in the formation. And of course, later on in one of the Black Butt missions, we paid the penalty for a broken probe, not from on a Victor, I might add, but on the Vulcan. And unfortunately, he broke his probe in very bad weather and had to divert into Brazil.
At the 6th fuel transfer, only 3 aircraft, the bomber and 2 tankers, were left. After the Vulcan had been refueled, and during the Victor transfer, they ran into a heavy thunderstorm, unseen at night with the radar switched off. The Victor probe was ripped off by the violent pitching of both tankers. Quickly, the Victors had to exchange positions, and the serviceable aircraft had to take all the fuel available and press on to the final fuel transfer. During this last transfer, it became evident that the Vulcan needed more fuel to complete its mission than the Victor could safely give and still fly back to Ascension. In the event, the Vulcan was past so much fuel that the Victor was left short. Its crew faced the prospect of crashing into the South Atlantic 400 miles short of Wide Awake Airfield and safety. 8 hours after taking off, the Vulcan released 21 1,000-pound bombs, straddling the runway of Port Stanley's airstrip, destroying aircraft, fuel dumps and stores. The fuel-starved Victor was forced to maintain radio silence until the bomb run was complete. Then, after frantic emergency calls to Ascension, another Victor was dispatched to bring the much-needed fuel. But the Victor effort was by no means over. In the meantime, White Section, another 4 aircraft for the recovery phase, had been launched. They started air-to-air refueling so that 2 Victors could continue full of fuel to the rendezvous point to provide the final fuel transfer to the Vulcan. Whilst this was going on, the short of fuel returning Victor made a perfect rendezvous with its recovery tanker, and both aircraft returned safely to Wide Awake. The Vulcan was also critically short of fuel by now.
We were short of fuel going down, mainly because of unserviceabilities and probes breaking off in the Victor fleet, but it was we managed to get round it in the end. Luckily, because we didn't have enough fuel to reach the coast of Brazil, so which was not planned at all.
And I might add that there was no more pleasing sight than on the way home, having done the mission, to see those 2 Victor tankers in the sky, and they were going to give us the fuel to help us to get back to Ascension Island.
And so, exactly according to plan, the Vulcan met 2 Victor tankers at the recovery rendezvous. The second Victor was a backup in case of any last-minute technical problems. Fuel was passed successfully and the formation headed for Ascension. Black Buck 1 was the longest bombing mission in aviation history. It demonstrated that the round trip of 8,000 miles was possible. After the raid, no further offensive aircraft of the Argentine Air Force were deployed to Stanley to interfere with task force operations. No fewer than 16 Victor tankers were involved. They flew more than 90 hours and used 300,000 gallons of aviation fuel. They were to repeat the whole process several times during the conflict.